So air injection systems are designed to control hydrocarbon emissions and CO. So they control raw fuel and the rich air fuel mixtures that are coming out of the tailpipe, or the CO that's produced from the rich air fuel mixtures that are coming out the tailpipe. And the way that they do that is, a lot of times, if you consider what's happening inside the combustion chamber, when I light the air fuel mixture, the flame's going to go out for one of two reasons. It either runs out of fuel or it runs out of oxygen. So when the combustion chamber is sealed up and we light it, that flame's going to burn until we run out of fuel or we run out of oxygen. Now, when it runs out of fuel, we call that a lean condition. If it runs out of oxygen, we call that a rich condition. So, in that case, we're accounting for, in an air injection system, what it has the ability to do is introduce additional oxygen into the exhaust as it's flowing out the tailpipe. Now, the reality is, the fuel is hot enough to burn. It doesn't burn because there's no oxygen. So, one of the examples that I would give to you to prove that, because you probably have seen it, if you have ever watched any racing on TV and you watch those dragsters run down the track, you often will see flames coming out of their headers. Because they're running a rich mixture, and once that hot fuel hits the open air where there's available oxygen, it lights itself on fire. All right? So what we're doing with an air injection system is we're taking a pump that's belt driven like this, or possibly an electric air pump like this, or there was older mechanical systems that are called pulse air that would then allow air to be introduced into the exhaust, whether it's through the exhaust manifolds or through a pipe that's just ducted into the exhaust. And by adding that additional oxygen, we can continue to burn that HC and CO to where we have CO2 and water that by the time it exits the tailpipe. So that's what an air injection system does. And so there's certain scenarios that we know that we're going to have a rich mixture. For example, a cold startup in the morning. When I start the car cold in the morning, even on a hot summer day, that's still called a cold startup, but especially in the wintertime when it is actually cold outside, then we're going to have a rich mixture. And so that rich mixture is going to produce some wasted fuel in the form of HC and some CO, because that fuel's not burning well and we're running a rich mixture in that cold temperature. And so by introducing air into the exhaust stream through an air injection system, we can continue to burn that air fuel mixture, that rich air fuel mixture, so that we can eliminate HC and CO before it exits the tailpipe. So cold startup's one scenario. Decel, when you accelerate and then you let off the gas, then that's going to produce a gulp of a rich mixture, and so then air injection can come into play there. When you're accelerating wide open throttle, that can produce a rich mixture, and so they can energize an air injection system or utilize one in that case. So that's the idea behind an air injection system, and it's used to control HC and CO emissions. This is the construction of a typical air injection system that will have an air pump, some lines ducted over to some sort of a control valve that controls when we introduce the air into the airstream, or into the exhaust stream. They'll have a little check valve, a little air injection check valve that looks like this. That's in this picture there. And they'll have a manifold that goes and routes pipes into the exhaust manifold there. And so that's the simple construction. This could be an electric pump instead of a belt-driven pump. It could also be what they call pulse air, a system like this. I'll quickly explain what pulse air and how it works. This is a straight mechanical system. And so the way that a pulse air system works is that we're capitalizing on the natural pressures that are present in the exhaust. And so in the exhaust, when I have the exhaust stroke occurring and the exhaust valve is open, the piston's coming up, we're going to produce positive pressure in the exhaust. And so then we have a positive pressure there, or we're building some actual pressure there. And then as that exhaust valve closes, then the air that was flowing out of that cylinder now has the door shut behind it, and it pulls into a slight vacuum as it kind of stalls out because there's nothing to flow behind it. And so in that case, we have negative pressure. It pulls into a little bit of a vacuum. And so these pulse air systems are designed to capitalize on that when pressure is present here, then it blocks it. But when we have low pressure or vacuum that's present there, then it allows air to enter the exhaust stream. And so they just kind of naturally fill the exhaust from the natural pulses of exhaust pressure with fresh air. So then we have a thermostatic air cleaner. So a thermostatic air cleaner, I'll show you a couple different varieties here. So on the end of old school air cleaners like this, you saw a horn that came out that has a pipe duct right here. And that pipe duct would have these little accordion little hoses that would fit over it, all right? And so this system was designed, you typically only saw it on throttle body injected vehicles or carbureted vehicles. That system was designed to grab just radiant hot air from the exhaust manifold. So just the heat that came off of the exhaust manifold, it would grab that hot air and then introduce it into the motor to help fuel evaporate when it was cold, when the engine was cold, or when it was cold outside. And so they had a little control valve baffle that you can see inside there, that baffle could close. And when it would close, then we would pull that hot air from the exhaust manifold. And then when it would open, it would block this one, and we'd pull fresh, cooler air. And so that's the way those systems were designed to operate. They were typically only engaged on a cold startup when we needed the help to kind of warm up the fuel and warm up the motor and help fuel evaporate so that we could get away from that rich air-fuel mixture faster. The setup is like this, that we would just have kind of a manifold. There's your exhaust manifold there, and this was just a little heat manifold or like a heat shield that went over there that we could route a pipe up to this air cleaner. And so the reason why I bring this one up is because anytime anybody does work on a motor like this, they're pulling the air cleaner off to get to stuff, and they often have to disconnect this little preheat tube, is what that's called. And so that often gets lost. If that's missing when you go in for a smog, you'll fail smog. So that's one of the other things. If you have an older car that you have to smog, watch for that and make sure that that is present before you go in for your smog. So then we get to catalytic converters. So a catalytic converter is like a big furnace that controls HC, CO, and NOx. And so inside a catalytic converter, I have it cut apart. There's a brick inside here that is ceramic. And coated over that ceramic brick is precious metals, platinum, palladium, rhodium, all right? And so obviously we're familiar with platinum. You may not be familiar with palladium. Rhodium is how they plate metal with white gold or things like that. That's how they plate it. So all of these are precious metals that are inside here. But when they get up to temp, about 400 degrees, this cat will get hot enough to where it actually starts to combust HC and CO, and then it will chemically break down NOx and separate the nitrogen from the oxygen. And so these are expensive components. I want to say, the most expensive single catalytic converter I've ever sold was a $1,600 part. I quoted one for somebody else on a Mazda Speed that had gone bad, and that one was $2,500 by itself. But that's a catalytic converter. They'll have a couple different bricks. Aftermarket cats will look like this. Factory cats look a little different. I've got a picture of one coming up. But this is an aftermarket cat that you're designed to cut out the factory one and then weld this in. The catalytic converters are considered an aftermarket part, and so when you put one on a car, a replacement one, if it's an aftermarket one, It has to have an executive order number, just like headers or any other aftermarket part, like your headers or your air intake or your turbo or any of that sort of stuff. Requires an aftermarket part. This is not considered a direct replacement. And so requires EO numbers, and catalytic converters, aftermarket ones are tracked. It has to match because it's controlled by an executive order number through the Air Resource Board, year, make, model, engine family. So they're very specific to a car. The catalytic converter does break down HCCO and NOx. Those emissions come in, breaks it down, and then will produce water, CO2, and nitrogen out the other side. That's a picture of an example of a factory cat. You can see how much different that looks than that aftermarket one that I had held up. Bolt-on flange, a lot more intricate design from the factory. The catalytic converters are also something, because they have precious metals in them, that people recycle. The shops do as well. We had people that came around and bought our old catalytic converters from us. We would sell them to them and make a profit from it. The catalytic converters that nowadays are regulated because people would try to steal them. And it's not that they're not still being stolen. They've just made it harder to turn them into a recycler. You have to kind of be able to prove where you got it from and like things like that, which then has kind of stopped the theft in a big way of catalytic converters. But we had customers that had fleets that like people would come in on the weekend and they'd cut out, 15, 20 catalytic converters. And that's quite an expense for a business. And so it's good that they brought regulations in. Some of the manufacturers are going so far to put unique numbering on these cats so that they can track which vehicle it came from. So if it was reported stolen, then they can track it. So there's stuff like that that's out there, and that's kind of slowed down. I don't really hear as many stories, but back when that was kind of a hot thing to do, there was companies coming out that had like cat locks where they would build a cage around the cat so people couldn't steal it and stuff like that. But because of the way they're regulating the recycling, it's not as big an issue anymore, but something to be somewhat concerned with. Because it has materials inside it that is a kind of a ceramic brick and a network of passages that go through it, it's something that if you do get your cat too hot, you can cause it to fail. It can plug the exhaust like this if they melt down from running too rich a mixture or driving around with a misfire, and you don't want to damage your cat. So if you're driving around with a misfire or a rough running vehicle, there's a potential you get it too hot that you even melt the ceramic, which is very hot. You're exceeding 1800 degrees at that point of temp in the exhaust to be able to melt that ceramic down. The cat would be glowing underneath there. If you plug the exhaust, then obviously you have no power, because if you can't get rid of the exhaust, you can't bring fresh air in. And so, not to mention, damaging a catalytic converter is very expensive. All right, even an aftermarket one's a couple $100, but some of these dealer ones, like I mentioned, I've sold some that were $1,600. So you want to make sure you don't damage them. They have a little ceramic brick that's in there, and it gets washed over with the platinum, palladium, and rhodium that is used to react and combust the HC and CO and chemically break down NOx. So oxygen sensors are used to monitor just about everything on the car, as well as a catalytic converter. And the idea for an oxygen sensor is it produces a signal like we talked about that says, well, it's rich, oh, it's lean, it's rich, it's lean, it's rich, it's lean. They put an oxygen sensor before the cat and after the cat, and if the one before the cat is going rich, lean, rich, lean, rich, lean, if the cat is making a difference in cleaning the emissions, then the one after it should stay pretty flatline. All right? If you get both of them doing the same thing, then that cat's not making a difference in the emissions, and then it would set codes on a 96 and newer vehicle. And so they're monitoring it with oxygen sensors there. Our computer-controlled systems, back all the way from the first generation of it, OBD1 in 1987, they started monitoring emissions components. The OBD1s were not very good at setting codes and monitoring emissions components for effectiveness, but by the time we got to 1996, where cars were OBD2, they became very effective. They're monitoring for fuel system faults, misfires, opens and shorts, or rationality sensor signals that don't make sense. They're monitoring the EVAP system. They're monitoring oxygen sensors, oxygen sensor heaters, the air injection, the EGR, catalytic converters, a variety of different systems. Diesels have their own monitors, but they're monitoring these emission systems for their effectiveness. And they're running active tests on these systems to prove that they're functioning properly the way that they should. And so the part of the SMOG program is to check these systems and see if the monitor for any of these different emission systems is functioning properly. And that, or not that the monitor is functioning properly, but that the monitor has passed, it's run its test, and that the emission system is functioning properly. And so, as part of the SMOG, we check the monitors for these emission systems. And so, if the computer runs a test and the test fails, then it turns a check engine light on and sets a code. And so I want to give you quickly a definition of what a monitor is. A monitor is simply just the test that the computer on the car runs to see if that emission system is working properly or not. And if it is, then it sets the monitor to ready or pass. And if it's not functioning properly, then your check engine light comes on with codes. And so the check engine light on your car is really there purely for emissions. So if that check engine light is on, there is some sort of an emissions failure on that car. That's all that check engine light means. Some running problems will cause, or some check engine light codes or problems that a computer detects will cause running problems, but some of them, like leaving your gas cap off, will turn a check engine light on, but it doesn't affect the running condition of the vehicle at all. Thus proving the point that that check engine light is there for anything that causes high emissions or emissions type failures. So the couple of things, the biggest point that I want to bring out, I've basically described that information there with the exception of this statement. If you ever have a check engine light that is flashing or blinking at you, right? One that's on means you have an emissions failure. One that is blinking at you or flashing means that you have a misfire that can damage your catalytic converter. That especially you pay attention to. If you get a blinking or flashing check engine light, you should not continue to drive your car in that condition. You need to fix it, get it fixed so that you can not damage that catalytic converter. So that's a big point that I always want to bring up to my students so that you know if you have one driving around, you're just costing yourself more money by continuing to drive it in that state. When a check engine light's on, there's different ways that it can be cleared. Traditionally, we would clear it with a scan tool or disconnecting a battery can turn that check engine light out by disconnecting power to that computer. However, when you do that, you also erase all of the monitors. So yes, your car will fail for the check engine light being on, but even if the check engine light is out, but the emissions monitors aren't set, it will still fail. The criteria for that is that a 1999 to 96 vehicle can have any one monitor that's not set to ready. A 2000 and newer gasoline vehicle can only have the EVAP monitor not set to ready. That's the only one they'll allow. Diesels, it's a whole different criteria. That from 1998 to 2006, they can have none. 2007 and up, they can have any two. So the OBD1 and OBD2 systems, if your check engine light is on, then it's going to fail SMOG for that. They have a data link connector that we can pull codes from. OBD1 it kind of began in the early 80s, but it went up to 95, but it was mandated by 1987. These were our computer-controlled carburetors and throttle body injection, some early port injection. This stuff was not very effective at monitoring emissions, but OBD2 that got mandated in 96, very effective, standardized a lot of our testing strategies, standardized the data link connector location, the type of information, monitored catalytic converters for effectiveness, monitored misfires. It was a real big upgrade to the effectiveness of the emissions components or emissions systems, and the ability to detect failures with a computer-controlled system. So here is a list of your common emissions monitors. Comprehensive component monitor is monitoring basically electrical circuits of sensors and components there for open circuits and short circuits or sensor signals that are irrational. Fuel system monitor monitors for system faults, misfires, monitors for misfires, oxygen sensors and their heater monitored, the EGR is monitored, air injection, catalytic converter, and evap system. And like I've said, if those monitors are not set to ready, then your car will fail smog. So now I want to talk a little bit more specifically about the smog program. We've already established that gasoline vehicles get smog from 1976 and newer. They get a 4-year exemption from the time they're new for change of ownership smog. So if within the first 4 years you decide to sell your car, it doesn't require a smog. After those 4 years, it's going to require a smog when you sell the vehicle. The seller is responsible for making sure that a vehicle does pass smog. Some of you guys have bought cars as is. The reality is, on paper, the law is the seller is responsible for for the smog. And so, technically, if you wanted to pursue it, then if you went after a seller for a car that didn't pass smog, you can get your money back. Most people don't do that. They kind of knew the scenario when they bought the car. But if somebody sold you a car under false pretenses, you can take them to court and get your money back in that regard. When you sell cars, you make sure that they pass smog. The way that people, to my knowledge, the only way around that is if you sell it as a parts car, you non-op the car, you don't sell it as a registered vehicle, then you can sell it like the wrecking yards do for a vehicle that doesn't pass smog. That would be the proper way that stuff goes down. You don't sell registered vehicles and then not smog them as a seller. You can get yourself in trouble for that if more people knew that was the law. So make sure that when you're buying cars, there's a lot of cars out there to be bought. So you don't buy cars that don't pass smog. It's not freaking worth it. I can tell you from my experience, I've had people that are like, oh, I got this great deal on this car. I bought this Prius for $3,000 and it needs $9,000 in repairs. It needs a motor, inverter, and a battery and stuff like that. It's like, don't buy cars that don't pass smog. The only problem is it just has this little light on in the dash. Like, well, that's your check engine light. You pull codes, it needs a million things, right? So some of the repairs on these cars can be really bad, and sometimes the person that's selling it, they know that, and that's why they're selling it. They're like, I'm not putting that money in this thing. I'll just off this car. So make sure that you don't buy cars that don't pass smog. There's a real good chance that when a car passes smog, it's a pretty good indication that that's a decently running vehicle. All right, so the monitors are set. It's not going to have codes that pop up on you or things like that. So make sure that you're buying good cars that at least pass smog. That's one of the best pieces of advice I can give you. Do not buy cars and under the pretense that you're going to be responsible for the smog. Screw that. You'll get we don't know what's wrong with it, and so be careful about that. That's the advice that I would give you. The diesels we smog from 1998 and newer. The diesel vehicles, they do not get a free pass on their biannual inspections. They get a biannual inspection from the time that they were new. And you're like, well, that seems unfair. Gas gets 8 years and diesels get 2 years after they're new? Yes, because diesel vehicles and diesel owners have proven themselves to modify their vehicles very quickly and right out of the gate. And so they have kind of historically been heavy offenders of modifying their vehicles, and so they end up with having to smog their vehicles 2 years after they're new. There is no exemption on the diesel, only for the gas, and so they get a biannual inspection 2 years later. And so our 2020 diesels right now will get smogged for a biannual inspection in 2022. If they decide to sell that diesel vehicle at any point after they bought it, they're going to smog it. So they don't get any of the caveats that the gas vehicles get. So how many different types of smog stations are there? I'll give you a minute to think about that. There's probably more than what you think. There's 6. So the types of smog stations that there are, there's a test-only station. A test-only station can only do smog tests. They can't do repairs. There's a test and repair station. They can do smog tests and repairs. There are star stations. A star station gets what's called directed vehicles. A certain percentage of all vehicles that get smog get directed to special stations. So there are star test-only stations. There are star test and repair stations. So that makes 4 different types of stations. The STAR program, they can do what's called gross polluters. Anytime that you have a vehicle that, the generic definition of a gross polluter is 2.5 times the cut point, all right? It's not exactly that, but it's roughly somewhere around there. It's well beyond what's allowable emissions out the tailpipe to pass. So if a car gross pollutes out the tailpipe, they get directed to a STAR station. A smog station can become a STAR station if they show that they, on paper, that through the history of them doing smog inspections for at least the last 6 months, that they are doing their smogs properly. In doing their smogs properly, they've proven to the state that they know what they're doing. They can get a special designation as STAR if they apply for it. And so being a STAR test only or a STAR test and repair is an advantage. They do gross polluters. They also do the directed vehicles. The intent behind the directed vehicle situation is simply that for people that are trying to cheat on the smog program, you may have your hot rod car and you always take it to this guy, right? Well, the directed vehicle program kind of tries to stop that and hinder that process so that you have to take it to somebody that you don't know, for example. So you can't just take it to the same guy over and over again. However, if the guy you take it to is a STAR station, then it's not a big deal. You always get to take it to that same person. But STAR station used to be called Gold Shield. That recently, in the last, 5 years or so, has become a different designation that's called STAR. So you can be a STAR test and repair. You can be a STAR test only. The referee is another type of smog station that is basically contracted by the government through the Air Resource Board. The referee works for the Air Resource Board and is contracted by BAR to do some special work for us in the smog program. If you wanted to change the motor that was in your car, if you wanted to put, an LS motor in your S2000, then that motor didn't come in that car, so now you have to go to the referee and prove that you brought all the emissions of components and systems and it's a normally functioning engine monitoring emissions in a car that engine didn't come in. Some of the other functions of the referee besides engine swaps is if it's determined that the parts that you are looking for to fix your car are not available, then the referee does parts locator service to see if that part is not available, and if in fact it is not, then in that case you can get a waiver for your smog to where you don't have to pass smog because the parts available are not there to fix it. One of the other things that the referee does is if you get caught like street racing or something like that, then you'll have to take a trip to the referee and certify that your car is put back stock and that you don't have any modified parts. The other thing that the referee's been doing a bit more of is the noise violation. So if you get a noise violation citation, then he goes and does the certifications for noise violations. The referee also does another program that's called the repair cost waiver. So repair cost waiver is if you spent over $650 towards repairing your vehicle to pass smog and it still doesn't pass smog and it needs more repairs. So if you spent that money at a certified smog test and repair or a repair only, which I haven't got to yet, or a dealership, the dealerships are allowed as well. So dealer, repair station, test and repair station, they're legal to do repairs on the smog program. If you spent over $650 at a certified station like that and you still need more repairs to be able to pass smog, then you can get a one-time waiver. You get to do it once for that car. You bring your paperwork up with you to the referee. He'll say, yeah, that's an economic hardship on you to spend any more money than you've already spent. I'll issue you a waiver for the smog for this year, so you have 2 years now to save money for the other additional repairs that you need, so that car is fixed 2 years later, and then it can pass smog. So it's a one-time deal. You only get to do it once. The intent is that in the 2 years that you get to drive your car while it didn't pass smog, you save the money to do the needed repairs so that you can fix it before your next biannual smog. So the last type of station is a repair-only station. They are legal to do smog repairs, but they do not do smog inspections or tests. So those are the 6 different types of stations. There are test only, test and repair, star test only, star test and repair only stations, and the referee. That makes 6. And so the other part of it that you should know is it is illegal for other types of shops, if they are not a smog shop, repair only, test and repair station. If they are not a smog repair shop, it is illegal for them to do smog repairs. So if you went into, Big Brand Tire here in town, just as an example, I know those guys are nice guys, but if you went into those guys over there and said, oh, hey, my car failed smog, can you fix it for me? Because they're not a smog station, they're not allowed to fix it. However, if you went in there and said, oh, hey, I got a check engine light on, can you fix that, right? The answer is yes, they can do that, but they're not supposed to once they know that it's for a smog repair because they're not a smog station. Nobody says you can't fix check engine lights, but if your car failed smog because of the check engine light and you present it to them that way, then technically you're incriminating them. So be wise in how you even write your paperwork down. Because I'm all about feed your family, right? But just don't incriminate yourself by what you write on your paperwork, right? If somebody comes in and they failed smog for their check engine light on, if you're not a smog repair shop, then please don't write down failed smog, diagnosed check engine light. Just write check engine lights on, diagnosed check engine light. Then you're fine on your paperwork, all right? So it's kind of a catch-22, but I want you to be able to feed your family, but don't incriminate yourself in the process. So that's that on that. So these are the options if you fail smog. You can diagnose and fix the car yourself. You can retire the car and get $1,000 or up to $1,500, and I'll show you that process and what's involved on that. You can apply for the Consumer Assistance Program, which is a portion of your registration every year goes to fund that program. It's a $500 voucher there. You could do the repair cost waiver, all right, which is a one-time thing. So I want to now show a little bit of information for the CAP program and the retirement program. So if we look at and just pull up smogcheck.ca.gov, all right? So that is the BAR's website, smogcheck.ca.gov, and on that page is some quick links here that the one you would go to says Consumer Assistance Program. So if you go to that one, this is an online process where you can apply to retire your vehicle and get $1,000 up to $1,500 depending on your income. Or if you wanted to repair it, then you can go into the Consumer Assistance Program. Both of these we apply online. There's information here. So if I go to apply online, then there's some eligibility requirements. And so the CAP program, period, is an income-based program. And so you have to income qualify for this. But if we just look at the eligibility requirements first, here's the income calculator. So depending on how many people are in your household, you could just throw in and say, okay, well, I have, I have 4 people in my household that I take care of, and we make $4,000 a month or something like that. And you can just check your eligibility. It says, okay, good, you're eligible. Cool. So you can throw some information in there and see if you would income qualify. But some of the things that matter that would determine right out of the gate whether you're eligible for this or not is that any car that you're going to try to apply for the consumer assistance program, you have to be the registered owner of that car. And so you have to really have owned that car for 2 years. I've had people that have got on, I did these cars and repaired them for the state for years and when I worked in the industry, and I've had people get on that have owned the car for like a year and 6 months, so it's worth applying. The worst they can do is tell you no. You only get to do this program once now. So once for that car. So if you have 3 cars, you can do it once for all 3 of your cars. You have to pay for the diagnosis and that is involved, and the state will pay $500 towards parts and labor for the repairs only, not for the diagnosis. Has to have had a failed biannual inspection. Can't be tampered. What a tamper is you've got like an illegal part on the car or an intentionally disabled part. You took the cat off the car. You put illegal headers on it, right? Those parts didn't fall off the car. Failed parts are fine. Parts that are installed that are illegal or tampered with are not okay. So if that's the reason why you failed smog, they're not going to help you out. The vehicle has to be currently registered and all your tags and paid up to date. If the tags and license has lapsed, you can, like, say the tags are expired. If you pay the license fees, you're still fine. The vehicle can't be undergoing a transfer of ownership, so you can't be just buying it. Can't be an initial registration into California either. Can't be registered to a fleet, and then it can't be a salvage title car. So if you can meet those criteria and income qualify, then you're eligible for the CAP program. So if we come back in and you wanted to do retirement, so if we came over here and we wanted to retire a vehicle, there's a couple of options here. Income qualifying as well. But if I go to the $1,500 option and I look at my eligibility requirements, it kind of breaks down the 2 options. Option 1 is the same for the $1,000 requirement, but option 2 for the low income requirement, they have a second option for this. All this information for option 1 is the same for the $1,000 retirement option, where they junk your vehicle and crush it at a wrecking yard, and the state will give you $1,000 for it. Option 2 is the low income requirement that is only available for low income. But even if you're not low income, you can retire a car and get $1,000 for it. So that's something to consider. All right, if your car isn't worth fixing or something like that. I've always said that about my old Chevy pickup. I'm like, I don't care. I'll drive it till it quits, because at the very least, I can always get $1,000 for it. So in the first option, though, couple of things. Same stuff applies as for CAP, that you have to be the registered owner of the vehicle. You have to income qualify. It has to have failed its most recent smog under option 1. And then the rest of this is pretty similar to the rest. It can't be a car you're just buying it or initial registration. Can't be a salvage title under option 1. And then they have some operational requirements that it has to have, the glass and the pedals have to work. It has to start on its own. I'll let you kind of review that. However, this does leave some room that if this is not a salvage title car, if you read these vehicle requirements, it leaves some room for a wrecked car. So like, say you got rear-ended or something and this car still drives, go retire it. It may be worth it for you to retire it. Nobody's going to give you $1,000 for a wrecked car, but if you can retire it, then you could get some money that way. Under option 2, one of the biggest difference for option 2 is they do leave room for a salvage title. So if you can income qualify for option 2, it can be salvage title, and then they still and it says so right here. They still require a smog, but it can be pass or fail. All right. For option 1, it has to fail. Option 2, it can just be we did a smog, pass or fail, and it doesn't have to be the biannual smog. This one has to be the biannual smog, but for low income, they just want a smog. Whether it was due for a smog or not, pass or fail, they want a smog. So the rest of that is very similar, with the exception that they'll take a salvage title car. Still the same operational requirements there. The other part that I wanted to show is this. So for option 1, this is available to anybody. It's a $1,000 deal. There is no income requirement. You just have to meet these requirements. So it has to have failed its most recent biannual inspection. There is no income requirement, has to meet the operational requirement and be currently registered. So hopefully that information helps you out. If you didn't know about the CAP program, if you didn't know about retirement, if you didn't know about repair cost waiver, those types of things should be helpful to you as you navigate. It may be beneficial for those of you younger ones that are in the class that it's been my experience that it's common that the car that you have is registered in your parents' name. Well, we know, most college students that I know are kind of broke, and so you would always meet that income requirement where your parents may not. So it may be beneficial to you to have that vehicle registered in your name and not your parents' name. So that's that on emissions. We'll have some information like this that's going to be on the final exam. So make sure that you review this well. Make sure you know the definitions for HCCO and NOx, and you've got a basic understanding at least of what the options are if your car fails smog, what types of smog stations, and then a basic understanding of the emissions components and what kind of emissions they control. So good luck. This is our last lecture. Good luck on your final. It's been my pleasure.